Greetings, friends. So, what's up? The President of the United States, Trump, did in fact speak yesterday evening with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversation lasted less than an hour, but in the end, the American president was very pleased. Well, at least he said that the conversation was excellent and even perhaps strategically important.
We had a really good and productive conversation. We thoroughly discussed various important things, and it was a very insightful and beneficial talk. I think it was a very, very strategic conversation.
However, there still remains some uncertainty about whether the United States of America will continue to support Ukraine. Because I would remind you that this week the US stopped supplying certain types of weapons to our country, but Trump says that maybe there will still be aid. Well, maybe, or maybe not.
Well, we have helped them, and we continue to help. It's quite a complicated situation. We'll see what happens.
At the end of this conversation, the parties agreed to keep negotiating. Well, at least according to the statement from the President of Ukraine, the American delegation is supposed to meet with the Ukrainian delegation and work out some solutions regarding further aid. Maybe they'll even start supplying us with more Patriot missiles. But again, that's not certain.
Because they need them for defense. I don't want people to die. And he says that they'll need them for defense.
Will you be sending them more?
I don't know, maybe.
Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems that in Ukrainian-American relations we're reaching a kind of turning point, when Donald Trump will finally have to make a clear decision about how to proceed regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war, whether to abandon Ukraine or to actually start helping Ukraine. We'll talk about this with you today, but first a brief announcement about something very important. Thanks to you, yesterday we raised 20 million hryvnias and used them to purchase more than 200 new Shahed interceptors. Thank you for this extremely important support. It truly saves lives. And today we continue raising funds for the current Russories, that is, for the needs of the front.
Let's keep moving forward. Donate to Russories.
Donate to Russories, because thanks to it we can protect the skies over Ukraine.
I have to say right away that I don't have a clear answer to the question of what exactly the Trump administration's foreign policy will be regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war. But there are at least three main theories. The first theory is that the United States wants to abandon us but is afraid to admit that they are planning to do so. And some signs point exactly to this theory, because during the Trump administration the United States already stopped aid to Ukraine twice, and Trump himself doesn't really want to talk about it. That's why perhaps he's doing it through officials from his administration. Again, regarding the scandal that happened this week, there were explanations in the American media saying that supposedly it wasn't Trump who made the decision. It was all under the direction of his chief of staff or maybe one of his deputies. And in the end, Trump himself doesn't say, we will restore and increase aid to Ukraine. He says, we'll see, we'll think about it, we'll make a decision, working groups will meet, and so on. And in principle, this theory has a right to exist. The second theory is even simpler and perhaps even the most likely one. There is complete chaos in the Trump administration, and the right hand may not know what the left is doing. And even his own officials do not always consult with Trump himself. And in that case, Trump's response becomes understandable, where he doesn't say, we will definitely resume aid to Ukraine, but rather we'll see working groups will meet. Because if he says it outright, then the question arises, does he even control his own administration? Well, and finally the third theory. This one is the most positive for us, because it suggests that Trump, whether he wants to or not, will still be forced to continue helping Ukraine. And right now he is looking for reasons, looking for explanations for the American audience, for MAGA supporters who do not approve of aid to Ukraine, so that he can later explain why he ultimately made this decision. What supports this theory is the fact that Vladimir Putin is making a laughingstock out of Trump. Do you remember his statements at first about 24 hours?
I will definitively end this devastating war between those two rival countries in just 24 hours. It truly won't even take that long to achieve peace.
Then there were stories about a few weeks, and later that maybe Trump could end the Russian-Ukrainian war in 100 days. And he even heard some positive signals from the Kremlin.
But three feel in terms of a ceasefire and ultimately an agreement, some very good signals coming from Russia.
And in the end, Vladimir Putin explained to Trump the other day that he simply has no cards to play and no influence over the situation. And to put it simply, he was told to get lost. That's why Trump was left like that, dissatisfied with the conversation. Let me remind you that so-called Russia rejected absolutely all of Donald Trump's demands.
I told you that I was very dissatisfied with my call with President Putin. It seems like he wants to go all the way, just keep killing people.
This is not good. This is wrong. I was dissatisfied with this.
Ultimately, I am convinced that in the long run, sooner or later, Trump will have to come to terms with what he has. He must help Ukraine, because above all, it is in the interest of the United States of America. But for now, I suggest we base our assumptions on the first theory, that the United States of America wants to abandon us. Because Trump, as you know, has no cards to play. He cannot put pressure on the so-called Russian Federation, or to be more accurate, he does not want to. And most likely he simply wants the war to end at Ukraine's expense, so that Ukraine is left without the means to defend itself. And then perhaps the so-called Russian Federation will seize Ukraine, and finally peace will come, because Trump, as you remember, is a peacemaker.
That's who I want to be, peacemaker and a unifier.
Time will tell us which of these theories is actually correct. But Trump will continue to look like a laughingstock in the eyes of Americans themselves. Vladimir Putin will continue to humiliate Trump, for example, with attacks like the one on Kyiv yesterday, right after their phone conversation.
And this isn't the first time that, against the backdrop of diplomatic interaction between Russia and the US, we carry out massive strikes. It's not the first time. In fact, we are putting pressure on Donald Trump with these strikes.
The American president doesn't like to look like a laughingstock, but Vladimir Putin is turning him into exactly that. Still, we have to proceed from the worst-case scenario in order to do as much as possible for our country. Because maybe I'm about to reveal a big secret to someone, maybe some Ukrainians still don't know or haven't guessed. The Russians have no plans to end the Russian-Ukrainian war or agree to a truce. They say this openly and directly.
No, there can be absolutely no talk of any kind of ceasefire.
We will solve the tasks and achieve all our goals. This is now Moscow's non-negotiable position.
And even if we assume that the Russians might theoretically agree to a long-term ceasefire someday, say, for example, if they are forced into it by massive economic problems, which is highly likely, it would still mean that the Russians would only be taking a pause to regain strength, improve their economic situation, and then continue the Russian-Ukrainian war. This scum won't just leave us alone. It will either collapse or it will keep trying to capture us. So in that case, the question arises, what should we do? First and foremost, Ukraine must carry out a comprehensive military reform. This is a matter of our survival. This is a matter of life and death for Ukraine as a state. Because if we keep acting the way we are now, we'll simply run out faster than the Russians. Second, we need to work more actively with our European partners. And this is happening. Third, we need to develop our own capabilities, especially drone technologies. I said yesterday that last night, thanks to you, thanks to your help, several Shaheds were shot down by interceptor drones. There were also results this night and the night before, and even before that. Interceptor drones are our future.
Unfortunately, they were hits, but today there were also significant results from the interceptor drones. Dozens of Shaheeds were shot down specifically by interceptors. We are scaling this up as much as possible, increasing the production of such drones, interceptor drones.
I have to say that the state is now also very actively involved in this direction. But of course, this is somewhat late. I spoke about the need to develop drone-based air defense back in 2023. Well, better late than never. But above all, we still need a military reform, because the Ukrainian army must become more effective, more modern, and change its approaches. And commanders who mindlessly lose personnel are obliged to be held accountable, not like it is now. In any case, friends, not everything is lost yet, and Ukraine can still turn the situation in its favor, but for that, real changes are needed. And over the past day, thanks to you, our soldiers have received another 308 new FPVs. Glory to the heroes! Thank you for ensuring that our soldiers receive only the very best. Thank you for supporting the development of drone technologies with your donations as well. This is extremely important. Continue to support the security and defense forces of Ukraine.